The Story of Civilization, Part 2. The Life of Greece, being a history of Greek civilization from the beginnings and of civilization in the Near East, from the death of Alexander to the Roman conquest, with an introduction to the prehistoric culture of Crete by Will Durant. Chapter 27, The Art of the Dispersion. Section 3, Sculpture. Never has statuary been more abundant than in the Hellenistic age. Temples and palaces, homes and streets, gardens and parks were crowded with it. Every phase of human life and many aspects of the plant and animal world were represented in it. Portrait busts immortalized for a moment, dead heroes and living celebrities. At last, even abstractions like fortune, peace, calumny, or the nick of time became concrete in stone. Well, people thought of those as names of God, and then thought of them as separate deities, and then personified them, and, Eutychides of Sicyon, a pupil of Lysippus, molded for Antioch a famous Tucca, or fortune, to serve as the incarnation of the city's soul and hope. The sons of Praxiteles, Timachus, and Kephisodotus carried on the refined tradition of Athenian sculpture, and in the Peloponnesus, Demophon of Messana scaled the heights of fame with a colossal group of Demeter, Persephone, and Artemis. But most of the new sculptors followed the line of least starvation to the palaces and courts of Greco-Oriental magnates and kings. Rhodes, in the 3rd century, developed a school of sculpture characteristically its own. There were 100 colossal statues in the island, any of which, says Pliny, would have made a city famous. The greatest of them was the bronze colossus of Helios, who was thought to be a sun god, or just the sun, set up in successive blocks by Carus of Lindus, about 280. Carus, says a naive tradition, committed suicide when the cost seriously exceeded his estimate, and Lacus, also of Lindus, completed the work. It did not bestride the harbor, but rose near it to a height of 105 feet. Its dimensions might suggest that Rhodian taste ran to display and size, but perhaps the Rhodians proposed to use it as a lighthouse and a symbol. If we may believe a poem in the Greek anthology, the statue held a light aloft and symbolized the freedom that Rhodes enjoyed, a curious anticipation of a famous statue in a modern port. The Statue of Liberty is 151 feet high from base to torch. I've seen an article about this group claims, it's a joke, sort of. It's like The Onion or something, but it's not labeled as fiction, where they paid millions to put a unicorn horn on the Statue of Liberty or something like that. It was, of course, included among the 7 wonders of the world, and I think it's a rainbow thing too. Notice how those people with the agenda leave off the indigo off of the rainbow. So, of course, indeed, the 7 wonders of the world. This statue, Pliny reports, was thrown down by an earthquake 56 years after it was erected. Few men can clasp the thumb in their arms, and its fingers are larger than most statues. When the limbs are broken asunder, vast caverns are seen yawning in the interior. Within it, too, are to be seen large masses of rock, by whose weight the artist steadied it while in process of erection. It is said that it was 12 years in the making, and that 300 talents were spent upon it, a sum raised from the engines of war, abandoned by Demetrius after his futile siege. It remained where it fell until 653 of the Common Era, when the Saracens sold the materials. So 22 years after Muhammad died, 900 camels were required to remove them. Almost as famous in history was another product of the Rhodian school, the Laocoon. Pliny saw it in the palace of Emperor Titus. It was found in the ruins of the baths of Titus in 1506 of the Common Era, and is almost certainly the original work of Agasander, Polydorus, and Athenodorus, who carved it out of 2 blocks of marble in the 2nd or 1st century BCE. Its discovery stirred Renaissance Italy and profoundly impressed Michelangelo, who tried without success to restore the lost right arm of the central figure. The restored arm in the Vatican is the work of Bernini, well done in detail, but ruinous to the centripetal unity of the composition. Winckelmann nevertheless liked the group so well that Lessing was aroused by reading him to write a book of aesthetic criticism around it and occasionally about it. Laocoon was a Trojan priest who, when the Greeks sent the wooden horse to Troy, advised against receiving it, saying, says Virgil, Timeo Danaos et Dana Ferentes. I fear the Greeks, even when they bring gifts. To punish his wisdom, Athena, who favored the Greeks, commissioned 2 serpents to kill him. They seized first upon his 2 sons, seeing which Laocoon rushed to their aid, only to be caught in the coils. In the end, all 3 were crushed and died from the venom of the fangs. The sculptors took the liberty assumed by Virgil and in the Philoctetus by Sophocles to describe pain vigorously, but the result does not accord with the natural repose of stone. In literature, and usually in life, pain passes in the Laocoon. The cry of agony has been given an unnatural permanence, and the spectator is not so moved as by Demeter's silent grief. In the Demeter of the British Museum. What, nevertheless, evokes our admiration is the mastery of design and technique. The musculature is exaggerated, but the old priest's limbs and the bodies of his sons are molded with dignity and restraint. Perhaps if we had known the story before seeing the group, we should have been impressed as Pliny, who thought that the greatest achievement of ancient plastic art was this. Now, this idea that most of the sculptors just went off to the royals as something different, it's about what survives in the reference and stuff. The ones that the royals didn't end up hiring, it wasn't like nowadays we focus on some of the most famous poets that were poor, or they were at least poor for a time, and then we know them, you know. So it probably was still mostly people who didn't really make it or just barely got by on the art. Many other Greek centers had flourishing schools of sculpture. In this underestimated age, Alexandria turned over its soil and its buildings too often in the long course of its history to preserve the works that Greek artists made for the Ptolemies. The sole important survivor is the serene Nile of the Vatican, humorously supported by 16 water babies, symbolizing the 16 cubits of the river's annual rise. At Sidon, Greek sculpture cut for unknown dignitaries a series of sarcophagi, out of which the best, misnamed the sarcophagus of Alexander, is the pride of the Constantinople Museum. Its carving is equal on a smaller scale to that of the Parthenon frieze. The figures are handsome and well proportioned. The action is vigorous but clear. The soft tints that cling to the stone exemplify the aid that Greek painting gave to Greek sculpture. At Tralles, in Caria, about 150 BCE, Apollonius and Tariscus cast for Rhodes a colossal bronze group, now known as the Farnese Bull. Two handsome youths are lashing the lovely Dirk to the horns of a wild bull because she has ill-treated their mother Antiope, who looks on in repulsively calm satisfaction. The original is lost, a marble copy by the Romans in the 3rd century of the Common Era was found in the 16th century in the baths of Caracalla, was repaired by Michelangelo, was housed for a time in the Palazzo Farnese, and is now in the Naples Museum. At Pergamum, Greek sculptors cast in bronze several battle groups, which Attalus first dedicated in his capital to celebrate his repulse of the Gauls, to express the debt which all Greek culture felt to Athens, and perhaps to spread his fame. Attalus presented marble replicas of these figures to be set up on the Athenian Acropolis. Fragmentary marble copies has survived in the dying Gaul of the Capitoline Museum, in the miscalled Patus in Aurea, in the Musea della Terme at Rome. A Gaul who, preferring death to capture, kills first his wife and then himself, and in several smaller pieces now scattered through Egypt and Europe. Perhaps to the same group belongs a dead Amazon in the Naples Museum, impeccably molded in every detail except the incredibly perfect breasts. These figures show a classic restraint in the expression of emotion. That conquered men suffer the extremes of pain and grief, but die without opera, and the conquerors have allowed the artists to portray the virtues as well as the defeat of their enemies. There is no sign here of any falling off in power of conception, accuracy of anatomical observation, or skill and patience of technique, almost as perfect as the great relief that ran along the base of the altar of Zeus on the Acropolis of Pergamum, and told again the story of war between what were considered to be the gods and the giants, presumably a modest allegory for the Pergamenes and the Gauls. Or it could be different types of humans competing with each other, because obviously Neanderthal and all that they were humans. The work is overcrowded and sometimes theatrically violent, but some figures stand out as in the best tradition of Greek art. The headless Zeus is carved with the strength of Scopas. The goddess Hecate is a lyric of grace and beauty amid the terror and carnage of war. The age was rich in now anonymous masterpieces that almost call the role of what are considered to be major gods. The majestic head of Zeus, found at Atricali, and the Ludovisi Hera, now in the Musea della Terme, so pleased the young Goth that he took cast of them with him to Germany, as, so to speak, the authentic autographs of Jove and Juno. The once acclaimed Apollo Belvedere, so called from the pavilion in the Vatican where the statue is formerly placed, is academically cold and lifeless, and yet 2 centuries ago it sent Winkleman aflame. A world away from this smooth weakling is the Farnese Heracles, copied by Glycon of Athens from an original attributed to Lysippus, all muscle in the overdone body, all weariness, kindliness, and wonder in the face, as if power was asking itself its never answered question: what should be its goal? Of Aphrodite, the age had representatives only less numerous than her devotees. Several of these statues had survived, mostly through Roman copies. The Aphrodite of Melos, the Venus de Milo of the Loo, is apparently an original Greek work of the 2nd century BCE. It was found on the island of Melos in 1820 of the Common Era, near a pedestal fragment bearing the letters Sandros, perhaps Agasander of Antioch, carved this modest nudity. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. People talk about the difference between Playboy and Hustler or something as a reference on TV. Don't know what they mean. The face is not delicately fair as that which forms the symbol of this volume, but the figure itself is a poem of that health whose natural flower is beauty. The wasp waist finds no encouragement in this full body, and these sturdy hips, not so near perfection, but still pleasant to the eye, are the Capitoline Venus and the Venus de Medici in the Capitoline Museum at Rome, and the Ephesus at Florence. Candidly and disarmingly sensual is the Venus Callipyge, or Venus of the lovely buttocks, in the Naples Museum, who drapes her charms to reveal them. It turns to admire her nates in the pole. More impressive than any of these is the superb Nika, or Victory of Samothraka, found there in 1863, and now the sculptural masterpiece of the Loo. It was formerly described as a dedication set by Demetrius Poliorcetes in 305 to commemorate his defeat of Ptolemy I of Caprian Salamis in 306, but recent discussion tends to connect it with the Battle of Kos, 258, in which the fleets of Macedonia, Seleucia, and Rhodes defeated Ptolemy II. The goddess of victory is shown as if alighting in full flight upon the prow of a swiftly moving ship and leading the vessel on to attack. Her great wings seem to pull the craft along in the face of the breeze that confuses her robes. Again, the Greek conception of woman as no mere delicacy, but as a strong mother, dominates the work. This is not the frail and passing beauty of youth, but the lifelong call of the woman to the man to lift himself up to achievement, as if the artist had wished to illustrate the last lines of Gothe's Faust. The civilization that could conceive and carve this figure was yet far from dead. The gods were not the chief interests of the sculptors who brightened this evening of Greek art. These men looked upon Olympus as a quarry of subjects and no more. When that quarry had worn down by repetition, they turned to the earth and took delight in representing the wisdom and loveliness, the strangeness and absurdities of human life. They carved or cast impressive heads of Homer, Euripides, and Socrates. They made a number of smooth and delicate hermaphrodites whose equivocal beauty arrests the eye in the Archaeological Museum at Constantinople. Now, some people say that the world, our universe card has a hermaphrodite on it, but it's virtually always depicted as a woman. So some people put it on the Arch or Temperance card. Are the Borghese Gallery in Rome, are the Louvre, children offered refreshingly natural poses like the boy who removes a thorn from his foot and another who struggles with a goose, both in the Vatican. And finest of this class are the trustful, praying youth attributed to Lysippus's pupil, Boethus, in the State Museum of Berlin. The sculptors went to the woods and depicted sylvan sprites, like the Barberini faun of Munich, are hilarious satires like the drunken Silenus of the Naples Museum. Here and there, with jolly frequency, they inserted among their figures the rosy cheeks and impish pranks of the god of love. And that, too, was separated out, you could say, but then again, you could say people have, they sort of reference the same thing. That's why, like, for example, Islam teaches that the worst are those who treat themselves as a god rather than those who just worship something that's not God.